I'd like to call this meeting to order. Today is Monday, November 10th, 2014. We're meeting for the purposes of the Committee of the Whole. I'd ask that you all rise and join me in a pledge of allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk Spencer, I'd ask that you call a roll to establish quorum.
Gutenkopf.
Here.
Goiter.
Here.
Dunn.
Here.
Leader.
Here.
Polumsky.
Here.
Graham.
Here.
Toledo.
Here.
York.
Here.
Levin.
Here.
Healy, absent. Honquist.
Here.
Kennedy.
Here.
Mulliner.
Here.
Wagner.
Here.
13 present, 1 absent.
13 present, 1 absent. We have a quorum. We're in session. Any announcements? Seeing none, we'll move on. Public comments. Did I miss one?
Sorry. I wasn't quick enough on the draw.
Alderman Toledo, you have an announcement.
Yes, I'd just like to announce to everyone that Alderman York and I are hosting a resident meeting for the Fourth Ward residents on Wednesday, November 19th. That'll start at 7 p.m., last until about 8:30 or when the last question is answered. And that will be held at the Elmhurst Historical Museum at the Education Center, which is, I believe, directly behind the museum itself on Robert Palmer.
Okay, great. Any other announcements? Alderman Gutenkopf.
Just a final announcement that Alderman Deuter and I are holding a town hall meeting at the Elmhurst Public Library this Thursday, the 13th, from 7 until the library closes.
Fantastic. Any other announcements? Come on, Alderman Bram, Alderman Polumsky, quick announcement.
They had their town hall.
Oh, Alderman Polumsky, you wish to...
Thank you, why not? You know, I don't think it'll hit the papers in time, but let's make an announcement. For anyone here who may want to attend, Alderman Bram and I are hosting a Third Ward Town Hall
Wait a second, never mind.
at City Hall on Wednesday, the 12th, at 7 p.m.
This Wednesday, 7 p.m.
Wednesday.
Fantastic. Okay, I think we're done with announcements. Yes. On to public comments at this time. Is there anybody
No one signed in, Mr. Mayor.
who did not have an opportunity to sign in, who is not employed by the city, who wants to add to the... Okay, going once, going twice. That concludes public comment for the evening. We're going to jump right into business before the committee. Before we get started, note of the time, I failed to do that earlier. It's 8:14. Hopefully, City Manager Grabowski and Alderman, we will get through the official list tonight. Certainly not the circle backs, but I would ask folks to be, how can I say this? Prepared. Thrifty with their time. Let's try to get through all of this. If there is something that you want to add to and you feel it's important, please, as always, put it on the circle back. But I think we have a shot of getting through this tonight. Okay? City Manager Grabowski, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, and I appreciate those comments. We'll do our best to accommodate that as well. I think a lot of the funds are fairly they're smaller compared to the general operating funds, and I think we'll be able to get through those tonight. To start, though, I'm going to turn it over to Howard Killian to run through the Municipal Utility Fund.
Great.
Thank you. I will give you a quick overview of the Municipal Utility Fund, kind of the major programs that we're looking at this coming year. And again, for everybody's reminder, this is the funds that take care of all of our water production, our storage, pumping, and metering, and then all of our wastewater treatment, our sewer mains, our lift stations, and the treatment plant itself. So the production and the treatment of the sanitary sewer, a lot of this year's work coming up will be the continued work on the Southwest Wet Weather Control Facility. A lot of the force main work is in, but we do have the pump station modifications and the excess flow facility to continue with next year. We'll also be working heavily with our consent order follow-up, most importantly right now with the sanitary sewer improvement plan, which the Public Works and Building Committee is nearing our final stages of looking at that. We do have a tank painting, one of our elevated storage tanks. We're looking at the one at St. Charles Road and Route 83 as the one we'll be proposing to paint this year, and we have $200,000 budgeted for that. One of the things we'd like to point out at the wastewater treatment plant is Gary does have in there an aeration system energy reduction program, which is a little over a $2.3 million system to be put in to save energy there. And we were recently awarded a $203,000 grant to offset some of that cost. So you'll see that coming up next year. In the distribution collection, we have our continued expansion of our sewer lining program, our leak detection of the water mains, our large storm sewer cleaning programs, and then the televising of those lines. One large item you'll see is a 50% increase of membership, and that is the other increase of our DuPage Salt Creek Stormwater Management Group that'll help us with our permitting at our treatment plant and our phosphorus removal. We also will be starting year 1 of 2 of our water meter change-out of all of our 5/8 1 and 1.5 inch meters, so all of our smaller.
Mr. Killian, Alderman Wagner has a question for you.
What line item is that 50% increase item you just brought up?
Do you remember that one offhand, the memberships?
Page 225.
255?
225.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Right, so that's showing an increase of 23,620, which is half of the city's share. The other half is in the general fund. We also do have then additional professional services and engineering work, and that is in relation, again, to the consent order, our smoke testing, our dye water flood testing, those items. In the water fund itself, you will see a 15% increase in the cost of water, and that is directly, that's the cost from the DuPage Water Commission for what the city buys our water for. You also have in there an additional $490,000, and that is for the increase in the water main replacement program, with the previous recommendation to start increasing that by an additional 700 feet each year to start getting more water mains replaced. And the last item we do have in the sanitary sewer, as part of the consent order, again, we are looking at the computerized maintenance management software system, and we do have $30,500 in that program just for the continued support of that software. That's a real quick down and dirty look at those funds, but we will answer any questions that the council has.
Questions for Mr. Killian? Alderman Bram.
Thank you. I didn't find it in here, but I might have overlooked it, or it might be somewhere else back in the Public Works area. But the Southwest Wet Weather Facility, which is always a mouthful to say, does any of those dollars come out of this fund, or is it, and if so, do we know where in here?
Yeah, it's actually was funded this year, and it'll be carryover. So it's a carryover projects from this current fiscal year.
So we wouldn't see it in a line item because it's carryover dollars? Okay, that's why I didn't find it. Thank you.
Alderman Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On page 229, line 5007, in 2014, you had 117,000 budgeted for the elevated tank maintenance. Dropped down to 17 is the actual or estimated, pardon me. And then it shoots back up to 317 for the next 2 years. Is that for the painting of the tanks?
Gary will be able to answer that.
Okay.
What page is that, Patrick?
229.
229, 5007.
Thank you.
Top one.
We didn't do the work this year. We had to add some extra money because there was additional work that was revealed in our study. So the price went up from 117 to 317.
317. That $100,000 wouldn't carry over? Wouldn't?
Tom, did we carry that over or just?
We just budgeted for the entire amount, new project.
He said it was 117.
Because it was different.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Bram.
Just a general question, since we just touched on the carryover topic. I believe, and Director Gaston could correct me, in years past, we've received, either at the end of the budget process, I believe, a summary of all the carryovers. If it is, if you can clarify if it is at the end of the budget process, and then is it a correct assumption that we'll be getting that same type of list this year? guess we should budget new batteries for the microphones.
Yeah,
It's like it's part of the agenda. Test microphone, put in new batteries.
you are correct, Alderman Bram. Right now, staff is working on what their estimates are for this year, what will be carried over to next year, and there will be a document that will go out at the time the budget ordinance goes out, so you can see exactly any changes that we've made to the budget based on activity here, and then any carryovers, and what those carryovers are for.
Great, thank you.
Any additional questions? Alderman Palomsky.
Thanks. Just a quick question, page 237, about the annual maintenance software report. Can you tell us more about that, or is it taking away some responsibilities that staff had to take care of? Item B, page 237.
Right. There were two ways we could have purchased this software. You could do an outright purchase. You could do an outright purchase for X amount of dollars. This allows us to have a continually refreshed software program every year, so it's an ongoing overhead for us. But it is very, very powerful software. But there were just two options we had, and we chose the second option only because it gave us software that never got old on us. We had a problem with software that was sometimes 7, 8, 10 years old and wasn't functional, so.
The software world, isn't it, Pat?
I do. I have some familiarity around software licensing. Would you consider that a term license?
It's a term license.
Not a perpetual license. We're not buying something and then we own it forever.
No,
right?
this
So
is
almost a lease.
Yes.
And that was the best option, in your
That-
opinion?
When we did our return on investment, it turned out to be the best option long-term.
Alderman Palomsky.
Especially, and this especially, I'm sorry, Mayor, this especially had to do with the number of seats. The problem was, when we get this fully rolled out, there'll be seats at City Hall, rolled all the way down to Public Works, and it just got unwieldy to add that many seats.
Understand. Thank you. Clarification.
Alderman Palomsky, follow up?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I just am curious to know, what does it do? Does it let you know when a pump needs to be maintained, or what does it do?
It does. It reminds us of intervals in maintenance that need to be done. The biggest thing for this is part of the smoking gun that turned out to where the IEPA dinged us for a report had to do with manual reporting, which we were doing by hand. We lost a piece of paper, and that piece of paper became, which we couldn't find, became what got us into trouble, I guess, for lack of a better term. This allows us to track digitally all our transactions, both from the City Hall all the way down to Public Works.
Okay. Alderman Dunn?
On page 220, line item 60, under wastewater administration, other expenses, $2.5 million. Can you explain what is in that particular category?
I didn't hear.
Page 219, you said?
220,
20?
under wastewater administration, line 60. Big line item under other expenses.
If you look at page 232, the detail for other expenses, a majority of that is depreciation of the wastewater system.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? All right, I think that wraps this one up. Thank you, gentlemen. Motor fuel tax, staying put, I assume?
Our large, really our only increase in the motor fuel tax is there is the increase of the salt purchase is up $62,640. bringing the total up to $303,300. And what that allows us to do is go up to our maximum purchase of 120% of salt for this coming year.
Okay. Alderman Bram.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Couple questions, one on 246, or two on 246. Line item 30-26, engineering. Are we even on
We're
this
not.
section yet? Oh,
I don't
did
think
go
we're
to
on
the
there.
Wrong one?
We're on motor,
We're doing motor fuel tank.
Sorry, I went to the wrong fund. No questions at this time.
questions on motor fuel? Seeing none, we'll move on. Now I can ask them. Let's hear the presentation first.
In the parking lots, again, these are the maintenance of our parking decks and the city-owned surface lots. The major projects coming up this coming year are the construction of the Addison deck. You will see an increase in de-icer costs of approximately $19,000. And what we are doing is we're going to a less corrosive material for the use on our decks, which will aid in its extended life of the concrete surface. We do have an increase in the parking lot deck maintenance of $26,000, and parking lot repairs are going up $71,000. And we're able to answer questions you may have.
No questions? Oh, Alderman Bram.
Okay, now I'm on the right fund. On page 246, engineering, which is line item 30-26. Last year it was estimated or budgeted as well as hit in the estimate for $70,000. Next year, 2015, it's budgeted for $40,000. What does this engineering cost? Because the following year it shows 0 projected.
What we do is we have our current decks on a 4-year maintenance cycle. So that is the cost where we have the engineers go out and evaluate the deck for any needed repairs. 2016 is projected to be the off year because we're on a 4-year cycle and we have 3 decks. So right now in the program, we will have an off year. Once the Addison deck comes online, you'll see a line item in there every year.
Okay. One question, one statement. The other question is about the same page, 246, line item 30-59, rentals off-street parking. And I do know that there's a J form. It's listed on the J form. But is this only for the Schiller Court parking lot? And it says increased lease payments to Union Pacific. Aren't we in a contract with them, or why are we seeing increases from Union Pacific?
The Union Pacific is really just our allocation of what parking lots we're paying for and stuff. So I know there was some changes as far as how we were allocating, and it was to correct those lots for the payment of the third of the revenue and stuff. The Schiller Court, we're estimating that will be gone after next year and stuff, so that's why it's dropping off in the second year out.
Okay. And then just a statement on page 247, line item 50-15, parking lots. I know this is in regards to city lots and utilizing stormwater best management practices. I just wanted to throw that highlight out there, that's a good thing that the city's moving forward with, and want to give kudos to that. That is all my questions.
Any other questions or comments on this line, on this budget item? Moving right along. Capital projects.
Capital Projects Fund starts with, it mainly consists of the 3 TIFs that we have. And as far as TIF 1 goes, I think the J form on page 257 explains the changes very well. Most significant being the paving of Addison, First Street to Second, coming out of the TIF. And other than that, some professional planning services, streetscape, fairly typical of what we've been doing. TIF 2, and I'll go ahead and explain 4 of them, and then answer questions. TIF 2, I think the most significant item to consider is that this is closing out at 2016, scheduled to close out. And so we have some money planned in there under land improvements for TIF 2, possibly some purchases. TIF 3, what I was asking the finance director and assistant finance director is that we have 3 more years of payment on bonds on that TIF, and that is scheduled to close out in 2019, TIF 3. And then TIF 4, certainly significant contractual services as we continue the planning for that. Again, J-Form on 275, I think, does a good job of explaining all those changes. So with that,
Yeah, could you speak into the microphone a little bit more, City Manager Grabowski?
yes, with TIF 4, significant professional services as we continue the planning of the North York TIF district, and the other improvements detailed on the J-Form on page 275. And we're happy to answer questions about the 4 TIF districts, to start with at least.
Okay, questions, Alderman Deuter.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple questions on TIF 2, so this is page 260. Estimated for 2014 is the 1.75 million, I think later it calls it a land improvement. On page 262, it's identified as a land improvement. Is that an expenditure that's happening in 2014, and what's, if not, what's the plan for that money?
That is not an expenditure. It was one that we were looking out into the future and trying to do some land improvements, some pulling together some parcels, and that just hasn't materialized yet.
Follow-up question. You mentioned that this TIF expires in 2016. If there are dollars left over at the time that it expires, do we have a certain amount of time to spend that down, or does somehow that get distributed as surplus at the end of 2016?
It would get distributed to the taxing bodies.
Okay.
Alderman Gudenkauf?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to follow up on Alderman Deuter's question. So when you say that the 1.75 million hasn't come together yet, does that mean that you're still anticipating spending it in this calendar, in this fiscal year? Or is this going to be, are we going to see something akin to a carryover or a different sheet for 2015? What are we still trying to do with that money this year?
I would say it's unlikely it's going to happen in this fiscal year. So it would go into the fund balance and carry over to 2015.
And is there a particular project? I mean, is there something that just hasn't come together yet in this TIF that you're hoping to develop in 2015? Was this just a placeholder, sort of an assumption that something might happen, or a hope that something might happen?
There are certain parcels that we've looked at and we've talked to the council about in the past, and so we continue to put forth effort on those.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Honquist.
We've had some discussions of purchasing homes, in particular flood areas, in the past, and I was wondering if there's an area or a line item we should create in the budget for doing so, and if this would be the appropriate discussion.
I think the most appropriate time to talk about that would be under the capital improvement fund,
Okay,
which would be the next category.
fair enough.
Alderman Bram.
Thank you. A few questions on TIF 4. Starting on page 273, there's a projection of revenue of over 1.6 million for sale of property. I don't know if further details could be given on that. I'm not sure what property we would be under city ownership that we would be able to sell.
That is the Han Street property. And if you recall, during the RFP process, the current developer has committed that sale price to the city.
Okay. Well, I think that's, well, I'll leave it at that. Next question being, and I know these two are under the J form, but on page 274, professional services, 30-52. And City Manager Grabowski, you mentioned in regards to continuing down the path of, for this TIF, for the planning of this TIF, but I thought we already have the draft plan already together in this fiscal year, so what dollars would be spent, projected at 150,000, if we're already pretty much in draft form of the North York plan? What else is there into the next fiscal year to be done?
That would entail any group of professional services, not necessarily just one. We are anticipating that some sort of streetscape plan may be undertaken. That would also account for legal fees, consulting fees, such as Barbara Schlicky, if there were certain developments that were to come into place. So it's an amassing of all professional fees.
Okay, understood. Streetscape plan, isn't that part of the North York plan?
Not specifically. If you recall, for the downtown area, there was a specific downtown plan, and then we went out and did a specific streetscape plan for the area as well.
Okay. The last question is, again, on, well, the J form item is on page 275, other public improvements. It's a significant dollar amount. I'm actually kind of surprised to see that large of a dollar amount at this point in the program. Can you further pass what the J form says in regards to landscaping and detention, et cetera? What specifically, maybe what this would encompass?
Mike?
I mean, is it all Han Street?
It is. It's not necessarily dollars that we would be paying to the developer, if I'm correct, but it would be improvements that the city would undertake as part of that.
Okay, which would all still be covered in the RDA. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. City Manager Grabowski, on 257, you highlight under other expenses, the,
What page is that, Alderman Kennedy?
257, under the J forms, the anticipation of a surplus being distributed to the other taxing bodies, is that sum of $1,788,900 representative of that entire amount?
That's correct.
Okay, and
And-
we would just be declaring surplus in TIF 1, correct?
And that's by agreement, when we extended the TIF in 2006, 2004. When we extended the TIF in 2004, we committed to declaring a surplus, and it was kind of the make-whole provision. And so that started this year with a smaller amount and grows each year.
Okay, and that's a contract, or is that a, what
That was
form
a
does that take?
That was a signed intergovernmental agreement between us and the school district.
Okay, I would ask that we put that on the circle back, if you don't mind, please. Thank you.
Okay. Other comments or questions? Okay, we're gonna move on. Capital Improvement Fund.
Mayor, before we jump to that, we do have the stormwater fund.
Did I jump one?
It's not on the list.
No, it's on the agenda.
Oh, is it, it's
part of
it's part of the,
Part of the capital
yeah,
project fund.
okay, okay.
What's that?
So this is where we've programmed the projects for.
Say it again, please.
This is where we've programmed the projects for the school and the Park District properties.
Okay.
So if anybody has questions, I'm happy to answer that.
Any questions? Alderman Gutenkopf.
Since the budget was drafted, we have the potential now to tap into the quarry for the project and what we've been terming the tree streets. How are we gonna handle that since it doesn't specifically show up in the J form for this?
When we talked about that, we did talk about that after the budget was published, obviously. And the general thought from our side was, we're gonna leave the number alone and see how we move along through the process with the now 5 projects, let's call it, to see which ones actually get done next year. Right now, we don't anticipate amending the budget, but if all 5 were to come to fruition, then we would have to come back and amend the budget.
So it's always possible that we may do 3 of the 5 or 4 of the 5, in which case, whichever project ends up being the priority projects, hopefully this is a budget number that can cover
Right.
what we need for that.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think as we get feedback from our fellow intergovernmental, other governmental agencies, that priority list, and I think a lot of us have talked about this, might change around a little bit, until we settle on a final project. So, good question. Any other questions or comments? No, I think Alderman Honquist is waiting for the capital improvement fund, yes? Any other questions on the TIFs or the stormwater fund? All right, City Manager Grabowski?
As far as the capital improvement fund, we reviewed the CIP, the 5-year plan, some time ago, a few months ago. And certainly we're happy to answer any questions about that rather than re-reviewing that. We'll just open it up for questions.
Alderman Honquist?
That is me. This is where I'd like to request a circle back to look at building a fund for home buyouts.
So we've talked about this a little bit, City Manager. If, let's say we put it on the circle back, and ultimately it would go to committee, what line item would you put, if, let's just say it's $1 million, what line item would you put in for a home acquisition? Where would that be?
You can see in the budget for capital improvement fund that we don't really charge expenses to that fund, but we allocate funds to be designated to go to other funds to pay for projects. So your point of land acquisition for stormwater purposes, we could either budget that in the stormwater fund that we just talked about. That's probably the most appropriate place. It could be in the general fund because that's the fund that has some money right now, but you can move that money. So you wouldn't budget it in the capital improvement fund. You may not even be using capital improvement dollars to fund that. So I agree with your circle back and let staff come back with, I believe it would be in the stormwater fund and an appropriate source of revenue to pay for that would be perhaps general fund balance numbers. If that's okay with you, I think that would be the circle back.
Fantastic.
Okay. Alderman Deuter?
Thank you, Mayor. I think some helpful information perhaps to guide that discussion would be looking at the history of the general fund and what that fund balance has been over time. We do have the surplus there, and we talk about the right amount being between 25% of that fund and of its expenses and 33%. And I think as we think about spending, we're over that now. As we think about spending down, it would be helpful to have that information so we know how much we can get close to 25% versus staying up at the higher end of that, more conservatively at 33%.
Okay, we'll make sure that information's available at the circle back. Other comments or questions? All right, we'll move on. Thank you, Mr. Killian. Administration and elected officials. City Manager Grabowski.
Thank you. This budget item includes the, as the mayor said, the elected officials and administration, which is mainly the manager's office budget. It's basically unchanged in terms of material items with some small exceptions, and with that, we're happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for this budget item? Alderman Bram.
Thank you. On page, hold on, I want to make sure I'm in the right section here before I speak this time. On page 118, the wages, full-time, I see the increase.
Is that 1001, Alderman Bram?
I'm sorry?
A line item?
1001, sorry. The increase from the budgeted to the projected, is that due to a full year of Public Works Director, or what is the, or is that just a normal increase period, just raises?
It's actually from the full-year communications director.
Oh,
That comes out of
communications
that.
director.
Yeah, and we'll touch a little bit on that in visitor and tourism, but like most of us, that salary is kind of divided up among different funds.
Okay, and then the one thing, I guess, it seems to continue to increase is overtime. Do salary, sorry, that's on the same page on 1003. Overtime for full-time employees, I know it's minimal, but do salary employees get overtime, or where's this overtime coming from?
No, this would be from the administrative people in the manager's office for agendas and
Gotcha.
things like that.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right. City Manager Grabowski, Finance.
Actually, I'm going to turn that over to Finance Director Gaston.
This also is a pretty basic budget. There are a couple things I would like to point out. Let's see, line item 3005, banking expenses. That continues to grow, and the reason it's growing is directly related to the use of credit cards and the fees associated with use of credit cards. Right now, the Finance Committee is looking at that from the standpoint of at what point is it appropriate for the city to charge a service charge for use of credit card? Is it ever appropriate? And we keep paying the high charges, but that line keeps going up, and that's the reason why. And it will continue to go up because our people, it's anything that you come in and pay for at the city. It can be a water bill, a parking ticket, a permit fee. Some of those permit fees, as you know, are very large. Those can all be put on a credit card. So we're looking at that and seeing how do we get a handle on that cost. The other thing I would like to point out is on the full-time wages line, the 1001 line. There is an increase there, and what we did is we had an opportunity. A vacancy came up in our accounting specialist position, and we looked at what we felt our department needed and worked with the city manager and moved that position from a high-level clerical to an accountant management position. So we added a professional accountant who's a CPA in that position. So that he started July 7th, so there's a partial year there this year, next year a full year for that person. Other than that, I'll turn it over if there are any questions.
Any questions? Okay. Claims?
Claims on, let's see, that's page 171. The budget represents history. You look at history, there are some things, claims that are ongoing that we know about that are in-house right now. Otherwise, we look at history and budget where we think we will be there. Questions?
Okay.
Owen?
It is what it is that what I'm
It is
hearing,
what
what
it
you're saying?
is on
Okay.
that one. Senior services, just on the very next page, 172. The only comment I have there is, you can see we continue to have great use of the senior taxi program. It is well used, and that's what the dollars represent. It's a little bit of cost increase on the part of the taxi companies, but I think it's greater that it is a well-used program.
Alderman Deuter?
Thank you, Mayor. As the utilization of that goes up, can you tell, are more people using it, or are the same people using it more frequently? Do you have any way to track the number of users?
You know, not really. It may be a little bit of both, but I mean, I would say probably daily we have people coming in here to get a taxi card and access the program. You often see an older person with their son or daughter bringing them in to sign up for that program. So I would say it's a little bit of both, but I think we continually get new users.
Alderman Levin?
This program is one where the senior would pay some percentage of the cost, and this is a subsidy. Is this the one I'm thinking of?
Yes, there are two programs, but the biggest part is the city's program. The senior pays $1.40 one way. The city picks up the rest of it. It's been $1.40 since sometime in the 70s or 80s.
But it was actually $1.40.
Yeah, it's, that's right.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I spoke out of
So and anything above $1.40 on that fare, and that program is only within Elmhurst. They can't be going off anywhere else. It's within Elmhurst. But it is a very good deal for the senior person.
Well, because I remember this came up before. It's not a popular thing to ask, but it's been literally since the 70s or early 80s since it was
Really,
raised.
yes, because it does come up from time to time. There have been recommendations to change it. It really hasn't gotten that far because there has been pushback on that.
But we look at it every 50 years, don't we?
Yeah,
All right.
right.
Alderman Braham?
Thank you. Along that line, I know it's been years now, and I don't even know if this program is still in existence, but the dollar amounts continue to increase, and it's a good thing. More frequent use, more people using it, et cetera. No matter what case it is, it's still a good thing to see that it's being utilized. Ride DuPage was something that we discussed years ago. I don't know if that program is still in existence, but since the dollar amounts are closing in on $100,000, is that something that the city should reconsider because of the frequency and the amount of use from our taxi programs? Wouldn't it be potentially better to go to something like a Ride DuPage program?
We can look into that and bring it back for consideration. I would strongly suggest we proceed with this budgeted amount for the taxi program, because I don't think we can do that evaluation and join it before the new fiscal year, but it's something we can take back into consideration. And I think the senior commission has looked at that in the past, and they'd probably want some input on it as well.
Do we know if Ride DuPage is still in existence?
As far as I understand it is, I think it's significantly more than what we've budgeted here, and that's always been the downside to it, why we've stuck with the taxi program rather than move to the Ride DuPage program.
Okay. Yeah, we don't need to make it a circle back, but if we can revisit it, that would be great.
Alderman Dunn?
Looking at some of those line items, we're budgeting close to $200,000 for seniors programs. We have $1,000 for the youth commission. I think they had requested an increase in that line item. Was that vetted? Are we looking at possibly increasing that line item for the youth commission?
I'll take that for now, and then if you want to add to it. When I took office about a year ago, the Youth Commission was down to 4 people, and they really weren't doing much. Good for them. They're actually at full now. They're at 9, plus some ex officios, including Alderman Honquist. And I've had several meetings with the Youth Commission over the past year, And we've hashed out some ideas. In fact, that's where I was this evening. There was a youth, the Commission on Youth was doing a heroin information seminar at Superior Ambulance. It goes a long way of saying, Alderman Dunn, that, and I think this is where you're headed, I want to put that on the circle back because I think we need to take a look at that. They're doing some good stuff. I asked them to, I suggested to them to try to partner with as many people as possible to try to become a bigger part of the community. So they indeed, after, I can't remember which of the meetings I had, but they did send a letter, and they have kind of itemized what they'd like to achieve in the next year. And I know that our fund balances are robust, would be a good way of putting it, and I think adding a little bit to this line item would be a good thing, a good investment in the community. So that's a long way of saying that I'd like it on the circle back, and we can talk about an increase at that point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Full agreement.
Any other questions as it relates to Human Services? Seeing none, we'll move on.
The next item is Health Services on page 174. And that's ambulance service and mosquito abatement, and those dollars are per contract.
Questions? Okay. One line item that gets a lot of conversation. Next,
Next is
contingent.
Is our contingent line item.
What might happen?
We're budgeting back down at a 50,000 level. You can see a couple years it was very high, and that was because of our either rough snow or rough flooding times where we captured our expenses here. But we are taking it back down to 50,000, being optimistic that it will be some normal years coming up.
Comments or questions? Alderman Levin.
Well, I can only see that it goes back to 2012, 2013, but I wrote really, next to this. I mean, I didn't read the Farmer's Almanac yet, so I don't know what's going to happen this winter, but is that a realistic level based on past history to drop it down to that low, like a 25% of what we've seen in the last 3 years?
Go back up.
What we've done in the past is just added the expenses in as we needed, understanding that when the bottom line balances, that we're okay. So to try to really peg that is like throwing a dart.
And is the decrease in a way, anyway tied to the fact that we've increased our operating fund reserves? Does that relate to this? Or general revenue reserves?
This is just kind of a general catch-all for things that we don't anticipate, like a rough winter or some type of major storm where we have expenses beyond what's in the operating budget.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman York.
Thank you. I think Alderman Levin raises a great point, and kind of the way I tend to think about it is, I think that the general fund balance does play into it a little bit. I know when we looked at this in 2009 and 2010, the funds weren't quite there. So I think it's less important to be overambitious when you have a healthy fund balance, is kind of the way that I look at it, so.
Okay. Moving on.
Next is cable television on page 177. Obviously, the biggest line item is professional services, and that dollar represents the cost to tape and all of our meetings, the meeting we're in right now, all of our council meetings, all of our other public meetings that are in this room. Also, the events that take place in the community, and the name is escaping me right now. Our Kind of Town, those types of events, that all comes in here. There's also a revenue source, the cable TV line on the revenue side, the cable franchise pays for this particular service.
Questions? Alderman Bram?
And Director Gasson, you already answered on page 177, the professional services, what that encompasses. I guess my one comment is, looking at elmhursttv.com, some of the programming that's on there, not the council meetings, but some of the one-on-one interviews, if you would, doesn't seem to get many views at all. At least, you know, obviously you can't understand who's watching it on cable or who's watching it on AT&T, but at least online, some of the views, while I was looking up old council meetings, were literally 6 months old and there was 2 views. I guess what I would like to ask, and maybe make that as a circle back, should we continue doing all the programs that we do for cable TV / AT&T / YouTube? Because if the people out there aren't watching it, I don't know what benefit it is to, even if we're only spending 20 grand on those additional programs, what's the benefit that we're getting out of it if we're not seeing the viewership? So if we can make that a circle back, that would be great.
Okay, circle back item. Alderman Mulliner.
Just one quick question. When is the cable franchise agreement up?
That is coming up shortly, and I know that Mayor and I have been in contact with the folks from Comcast to start that process.
Okay.
Any comments or questions? Visitor and tourism.
You'll see some changes in this one. We made the transition last year from the part-time visitors and tourism staff member to the communications director. That salary is now being taken out of general fund, and Director Gaston and I have talked that this is maybe eventually being phased out of the visitors and tourism budget and absorbed into other budgets. But a couple of the items that remain here include the holiday decorations, which is our transfer to City Center for, and, is it just City Center? Villette and York and Spring Road, the contribution we make to the holiday decorations, the community grant program, which we know remains at the same funding that was requested last year by the council, or, excuse me, approved by the council last year. And the public information program, that's our marketing efforts that Dan Leahy is reviewing now to see what the best way to spend that money is. With that, happy to answer any questions.
Alderman Palomsky.
Thank you. Thanks for some of the restructuring that we see here. My question is, the public information program, does it make sense for some of these still to be separated? You know, where else might this come from, like other marketing efforts? Would it make more sense to put it in a different line item? I'm just wondering, for any of the other efforts that Dan is taking over, some that might fall underneath my COPS duties, I'm just wondering why this is separated. I think it might be kind of difficult to say, you know, this campaign is visitor and tourism, but this one is economic development and this one is marketing, and I'm just wondering why it's still separated.
Yeah, and I asked Mike to come up here because, as you pointed out, Alderman, that is under Mike's purview for economic development and marketing. I think as I said earlier, we're in a transition now to see where that's best spent and what's best done with that. So for this year, I guess we'd request that it remain here, and as we move forward in future budgets, combine or pare down whatever we need to do, those expenses, and better define them, and I think part of that effort will be done at the DPZ committee as we review all those. Is that fair?
Other questions or comments? Alderman Gutenkopf.
Yes, the community grant program, this year we increased it quite considerably, and I'd like to hear more about how that has performed over the course of the year, since this is the budget allocation we have going forward. So I'd like a more full report on that. So if we could put the community grant program on the circle backs for future discussion, I would appreciate that.
Okay, so I think a breakdown of, you know, how much went to the symphony, which museum, et cetera.
Yeah, yes, I'd like kind of the breakdown. I know that staff do an evaluation of the organizations that we make the grants to. I think it's always important that if we make grants, we have a clear understanding of what the community benefit is for that $134,000. So I think I'd like to hear about that.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Debt service?
I'm going to ask Director Gaston to address that.
The debt service fund captures the dollars from other funds that are used to pay for the city's debt service. So the dollars you see there are the annual debt service dollars that are going to be paid on the city's general obligation bonds. And these are for, I will call them the governmental funds. For instance, if it is debt that is financed by the utility fund, it's going to be in the utility fund. If it's parking system, you're going to find the debt service in the parking system. Those are different types of funds. The debt that's paid from a TIF fund, from the general fund, I guess those are the only two. Those will be transferred into this fund and held until such time as we need to pay the debt service. You can see back in our fiscal year 2012-13 and our short 8-month year, that at the end, well, actually just our fiscal year 2013, at the end of the year there was no fund balance. Prior to the change in the fiscal year, the two debt service payments, one in September and one in March, were within our old fiscal year and within the time frame that we received property tax dollars in order to pay that debt. Now we have changed our fiscal year. We received the property tax dollar in 1 year, but some of those dollars are actually for debt that's going to be paid in March of the next year. So you have a fund balance at the end of the year. The fund balance doesn't mean that that's excess money that we can use for something else. It means it's sitting there until the debt service comes due in March, then it'll go down to zero, and then it'll go up again later. So it's that you see a fund balance in this particular fund is solely due to the fact that we changed our fiscal year, not indicating that we have new money. And I will also point out that really, I think 2 or 3 times in the last couple of years, we've been able to refinance bonds and significantly save on debt service. Hard to see maybe directly as you look at the numbers here, but that is definitely the case, particularly our last one where we refinanced in 2008, and it was well over $600,000 that we saved in debt service over the rest of the life of that bond.
Alderman Bram?
So, when or where will we see the GO bonds for the Addison garage? Would it be in here? And would it be in the next fiscal year? Because we will be issuing GO bonds for the Addison garage, correct?
Yes. And I will show you, it's in the parking system. Just go back to page 247, if you will. And you see the part that is debt service. You see principal on 2014 bond issue. And also, right now, interest on the 2015 bond issue. Those are issues that relate to the Addison deck.
So in the section that we were just in, it would not?
It would not be there because the parking system is an enterprise fund. And in an enterprise fund, you actually are charging, it looks more like a business, So you're charging those funds, sitting in those funds are expenses like depreciation that you don't see in a governmental fund, and the actual debt service is sitting in that fund.
Thank you for that.
It's a government accounting thing, so sorry, it's confusing.
Thank you.
Any other questions on debt service?
Okay.
All right, Mr. Grabowski, am I reading this right? Is this our last one?
Yes.
Fantastic.
And this, the trust and agency funds are funds that the city accounts for, but really has no access to those monies. The city does the accounting for the fire pension and the police pension. We show that here, but we don't have access to that money. But we still show the budget. Another one, a small fund, a Glass Mausoleum Fund. It's restricted, it has to have its own fund. You see there's about $34,000 there. It's strictly for the upkeep, maintenance of the mausoleum. And the working cash fund on page 301, you will see in 2014 is the the final of a 5-year repayment from the general fund to the working cash fund for the loan that was made several years ago when the general fund was having some difficult times. And the policy for the working cash fund says that it stays between $800,000 and $1 million. Once it gets over $1 million, any funds are then transferred to the general fund, and that will happen in 2016. That's what the operating transfer out of $7,388 is. So now it is back up to flush, and hopefully will not be needed to be used for a long time.
Okay.
And I think that's it.
Any other questions? Alderman Levin.
I have two. I would like to add a circle back to planning on page 132.
One sec, Alderman Levin, let me just, are we good with the,
I'm
Ms. Gaston's, are we good with Ms. Gaston's explanation on item CC before we wrap up? I'll take that as a yes. Alderman Levin.
sorry, thank you. And I just thought I was curious, we don't talk about page 179. Is that?
You know, I knew somebody
you're
would
hiding
find
money
that.
there, yeah.
It just occurred to me, I saw it and I thought, oh my God, I forgot a page. That page has the transfer from the general fund to the working cash fund of the last transfer of the 191,000. It also shows the transfer from the general fund to the debt service fund for the debt that the general fund is responsible for.
And that was a good moment to make that last transfer of the 191.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very good. Doggone.
Okay, I think that concludes for tonight. Before we wrap up, we'll go, we are going to go back to the circle back the next time we meet. Is that next Monday evening, Mr. Grabowski?
That's correct.
Okay, at this time, is there anybody who wants to add anything else to the circle back that maybe they didn't have an opportunity to, or after review of the entire budget, thought something else should or could be on the circle back for further discussion? Alderman York.
Thank you. I'd like to revisit the purchase of the 100-foot ladder truck, please.
Okay. Anyone else want to add anything to the circle back list? No? Okay. And then, as we normally do, during circle back, if we're lucky, we'll get through it in one meeting. I think we've done, it's been about 50-50 in the past. We get through it in one meeting. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. And at that time, we'll entertain motions to amend the budget. As we do, I'll remind everybody that just because it's in the budget doesn't necessarily mean we spend it, but we do have to pass the budget. Alderman Bram.
Yeah, just to make sure expectations are set appropriately, so this Thursday, we'll have a summary of what all the circle back items are as part of our packet, I guess you could say. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Entertain a motion to adjourn. Alderman Wagner. Second by Alderman Honquist. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.